I was still lightheaded when the rideshare turned onto our narrow street in Providence. The late afternoon smelled like wet sidewalks and cut grass. I had pictured this moment for weeks. Stepping back through my own front door, setting down my tote, breathing the lemon scent of the kitchen. I scrubbed every Saturday. Instead, the car stopped, and my heart went very quiet. The gate was the same chipped green, I remembered. The wind chime I made from old keys tapped nervously against the eave. But the lock on the iron gate was new. A polished cylinder that reflected my face back at me like a stranger. I reached for it out of habit and felt a tiny pinch of panic. The kind that starts in the ribs and climbs the throat. "Daniel," I called. Voice thin. "Claire." "I am home." The words landed on the porch and did not move. My hands trembled on the cane. I pressed the buzzer and waited. Head spun with hospital lights and beeping monitors that still seemed to echo in my ears. From the front window, the curtain lifted a fraction. I saw the shape of Claire. Then the slip of fabric fell. Neat and final. I called again. I tried to turn the lock the way I had for 20 years. It did not know me. A neighbor across the street paused with her recycling bin and tried not to stare. I smiled. The way women learn to smile when they are falling. And said, "I forgot my key." She nodded, as if forgetting were contagious. The door opened at last. Not the gate, but the front door beyond it. Claire stood 2 steps inside. One hand on her phone. Her smile was bright and dry. "You should rest somewhere familiar," she said. "The house is undergoing changes. There is dust. It is not safe for you today." "This is my home," I said. Careful and calm. "I will be quiet. I just need to lie down." She shook her head. "Daniel is on a call. We can talk later." The door began to close with careful politeness, like a mouth that does not want to taste. Through the glass, I glimpsed my son move past the hallway table without looking up. He tugged the curtain as if rearranging air could erase me. I stood at the gate until my legs softened. The wind stirred the rosemary I planted by the steps. It smelled like sharp green memory. A single sparrow skittered across the walk, bold and unafraid. I was the only one pretending not to be frightened. I leaned on the cane and looked at the new lock again. A lock is supposed to keep danger out. It can also keep a mother on the wrong side of her own life for years. The first night, I realized something had shifted was not dramatic at all. It was dinner. A Tuesday. The same kind of evening when my husband used to come home, smelling of sawdust and soup. I set the table like I always had. But when I reached for my old porcelain bowl, the one with tiny blue flowers, it was missing. I found it later, hidden under an upside-down plastic basket in the pantry, dust clinging to the rim. When I asked Claire if she had seen it, she only said, "You should not use old chipped dishes. They break too easily." Then she handed me a smaller bowl, pale and shallow, better for tiny portions. From then on, my meals shrank. At first, it was subtle. Daniel and Claire's plates would be full of steaming food, while mine carried only a spoonful. They said it was for my health. Too much salt and fat at my age. I tried to believe them, tried to be grateful. But gratitude tastes different when it comes served with pity. Soon, I noticed I was not invited to the table as often. Some nights I would come out of my room to find the dining room cleared. Only the smell of roasted chicken left in the air. On the counter, a plate waited for me, covered in plastic wrap, already cold. The kitchen light hummed above me as I ate alone. I remember one evening more clearly than the rest. Claire was slicing beef, the knife moving fast, her back straight. Daniel sat scrolling on his phone. When I offered to chop vegetables, Claire glanced at me, lips pressed into a thin line. "Please," she said. You spill things. Better to sit and rest. She did not raise her voice, but her words landed like a slap. Daniel never looked up. I sat at the edge of the couch, pretending to knit. My hands empty. From where I was, I could see their laughter over the meal I had not been asked to help prepare. My stomach growled, but my pride was louder. At times, I told myself this was natural. Children grow up. They want space. Maybe I was the one intruding. I convinced myself I was being sensitive, that Claire was only tired. But the truth was simpler. I was being erased slowly, like chalk on a sidewalk washed by thin rain. The day before I was admitted to the hospital, I walked into the kitchen and found 2 separate trays set neatly. One was elegant, with silver cutlery and fresh soup for Daniel and Claire. The other, mine, sat near the sink, a lonely plate of boiled vegetables and dry rice. No one spoke about it. It was as if silence itself had become the language of our household. And in that silence, I began to understand. I was no longer part of the family table. I had become a guest in the very home my hands once built. The hospital was a blur of white walls, antiseptic smells, and the constant beep of machines that seemed to measure not just my heartbeat, but my dwindling place in this world. I had been there for weeks, recovering from surgery, my body aching in ways it never had before. Every morning, nurses came with soft voices and careful hands. And every evening, I watched the hallway lights flicker, wondering if Daniel would visit. One rainy afternoon, the door opened and in came Claire, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She carried a bright bag of fruit and a bouquet of lilies, whose perfume was far too strong for the small room. Daniel followed behind her, his expression flat, his eyes avoiding mine, as if the sight of me tethered to IV lines embarrassed him. "How are you feeling?" Claire asked sweetly, but her tone was rehearsed, like a singer hitting a note she no longer cared for. She placed the flowers on the counter, then pulled a thick folder from her bag. "We brought some paperwork. Just hospital forms. Nothing serious. If you sign now, it'll save us trouble later with the billing office." She laid the folder on the side table, sliding a pen toward me. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of suspicion. I glanced at the top sheet, and my breath caught. Bold letters screamed, "Power of attorney and property transfer agreement." I lifted my eyes slowly. Claire's smile didn't waver. Daniel stood by the window, pretending to study the rain. I cleared my throat. "This is for medical bills." My voice was steady, though my pulse raced. Claire leaned closer. "Yes. Just routine. You don't need to read the details." I coughed, buying time. My fingers brushed the pen, then let it fall. My chest felt heavy, but my mind was sharper than ever. "I will sign after I drink some water," I said softly. "Please." Claire sighed, annoyed, but handed me the cup. As she turned to fix the straw, I slid the top page aside with my pinky. The words leapt out again. Authority. Transfer. Irrevocable. I set the paper back before she noticed. My son, my own flesh, still would not meet my gaze. That silence told me everything. He knew. I smiled faintly and sipped the water. "Maybe tomorrow," I whispered. "My hand is too weak today." Claire pressed her lips together, gathering the folder with an audible snap. "Fine. Tomorrow." When they left, I lay back against the pillow, my heart pounding harder than the monitor's rhythm. The rain outside struck the glass in angry bursts. They thought I was frail enough to trick. They thought my mind was as fragile as my bones. But I still remembered where my strength lived. Hidden in old drawers. In boxes no one had touched. in documents they believed were lost. They had a lock. But I had the key. Long before the hospital. Long before Claire's false smiles. I had prepared for storms like this. Years earlier. When Daniel asked me to transfer the deed to his name, I agreed. He was newly married. Eager to prove himself. I wanted him to feel secure. To have a foundation for his family. But I was not naive. I had insisted on one clause. Written in careful legal language and sealed with the notary's stamp, the right of lifelong residency for Eleanor Hayes. Regardless of circumstance. That line, small and quiet, was my anchor. Most people thought I was forgetful. A widow drifting through her days with knitting needles and recipes. What they never saw was the old sewing box in the back of my closet. Inside, beneath folded fabric scraps, I had hidden copies of every document, receipts from the lumberyard, invoices from the contractor, proof of the down payment I had scraped together selling quilts at the Saturday market. My fingerprints were on every brick of that house. Claire once joked that I was a sentimental hoarder when she tried to clear out the storage room. She never touched my sewing box. She thought it was just clutter. Relics from a life that no longer mattered. She never knew it was my fortress. After that hospital visit, I asked a kind nurse named Evelyn if she could help me. Late one night, while the ward was quiet, I retrieved the worn folder I had slipped into my hospital bag. My hands shook as I opened it. But not from weakness, this was power. Inside were color copies of the deed, the residency clause circled in red ink, and a faded receipt stamped with my name for the original foundation work. I asked Evelyn to take photographs with her phone, then email them to an old account I had nearly forgotten. She hesitated, but when she saw my eyes, she nodded. As the files sent, I felt a strange relief. Even if fire burned the papers, even if Claire found the box, the truth now lived in places she could not touch. Back in the neighborhood, whispers had already started. Mrs. Fez Lopez from 2 doors down mentioned seeing men with measuring tapes in my yard while I was in the hospital. They said Claire was talking to a realtor, planning to sell quickly, as if the house were already hers. When I heard that, I did not rage. I simply sat taller, knowing their plan would collapse on the very first signature. People like Claire believe the elderly are powerless. That frailty means defeat. But I had learned something over decades of scraping and saving. Strength is not in how loud you shout, but in what you quietly keep. The locks on the gate were new. The paint on the walls could be changed. But the papers in my box, the proof on that email, and the memory of what my hands built, those were unshakable. They thought they had silenced me. In truth, I was only waiting. 2 weeks after I was discharged, I was staying at Mrs. Ayers Lopez's spare room, sipping weak tea from her chipped mug, when Claire appeared at the door. She did not knock timidly like a guest. She pushed the screen open with the confidence of someone used to claiming space. Her perfume arrived before her voice. She carried a large, cream-colored envelope, thick enough to bulge at the seams. She set it on the kitchen table between us and tapped it twice with her manicured finger. "For you," she said smoothly. "Use it for medicine, clothes, whatever you want." I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. The elastic band strained around the stack inside. Fresh bills. The smell of ink, sharp, even from where I sat. Claire leaned closer, her smile stiff. "We want you to be comfortable. Im. No need to worry about old papers. No need to hold on to things that make life complicated." My chest tightened. Old papers. That was the phrase. She meant the deed. The receipts. The documents she believed were gone. She wanted to buy silence. I asked quietly. "Did Daniel agree to this?" Her lips flickered. "He is busy," she replied. I handle these matters. For a moment, I saw myself taking the money, counting it, pretending the past had no weight. But my hands stayed in my lap. I slid the envelope across the table, back toward her. Keep it, I said. Voice steady. Money does not replace respect. Her eyes sharpened. The mask slipping. Do not be foolish. People will think you are ungrateful. Ungrateful. The word clanged in my ears like a slammed door. I leaned forward, close enough for her to see the lines around my eyes, carved by years of work and sacrifice. Claire, I whispered. You can buy curtains. You can buy furniture. But you cannot buy the truth. Her cheeks flushed. She snatched the envelope, shoving it back into her bag. For a second, her hand trembled, not from fear, but from anger at losing control. She stood so abruptly, her chair scraped the tile. You will regret this, she hissed. Then she was gone, heels echoing down the hall, perfume lingering like smoke after fire. I sat in silence, my tea now cold. My body shook, but not from weakness, from certainty. If they were desperate enough to bribe me, then my documents still mattered. The truth was sharper than any lock, heavier than any envelope of cash. They thought I was cornered. In reality, the walls were closing in on them, and I was ready to let them. The notice came on a folded flyer, slipped under Mrs. S. Lopez door, a neighborhood association meeting, scheduled for Thursday evening at the community hall. I knew at once it was no coincidence. Someone, maybe even Claire, had whispered about family disagreements to the board. My chest tightened. But instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. This was the place where truth could stand, not hidden in drawers or whispered in kitchens. That night, the hall smelled of old wood and dust. Plastic chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors settled in, fanning themselves with papers. I sat near the front, my worn handbag on my lap, the documents inside pressing against my palm like a steady heartbeat. When my name was called, I rose slowly. The room fell quiet. I cleared my throat, eyes on the wooden podium. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I have lived at 14 Alder Street for more than 40 years. Recently, I returned from the hospital to find the locks changed on my home. My voice wavered at first, but steadied with each word. I am here to state that I did not leave voluntarily. Gasps rippled through the room. I pulled a folder from my bag and held up a document. This is the deed that shows my son Daniel's name. Yes, but it also contains my right of lifelong residency, notarized and stamped. That right was violated when I was locked out. Behind me, a chair screeched. Claire's voice sliced through the murmurs. That is not true. Eleanor chose to stay with a neighbor. We only wanted what was best for her. Her tone was sharp, desperate. Daniel sat beside her, staring at the floor, jaw clenched. I did not turn to face them. Instead, I laid out another paper on the table before the board. Here are receipts from the construction, proof of my financial contribution. And here is confirmation from the city that I remain a legal resident at that address. The board members leaned forward, examining the seals and signatures. One of them, Mr. Ing Carter, adjusted his glasses and spoke with deliberate weight. Mrs. Allen Hayes has every right to return to her home. Preventing her entry is a violation. Plain and simple. The room filled with low voices, some angry, some sympathetic. Mrs. Allen Lopez rose from her seat and said firmly, "If my children ever treated me that way, I would not forgive them." Others nodded, eyes fixed on Claire and Daniel. I stood straighter, feeling the strength of air filling my lungs. I am not here to argue. I am not here to beg. I am here to remind everyone that the truth is not fragile. It only waits for the moment to be seen. And in that hall, with the neighbors I had greeted for decades watching, the truth finally stood beside me. Undeniable. The night after the meeting, I sat alone by the small lamp in Mrs. Bard Lopez's kitchen. The documents I had shown were stacked neatly beside me, their edges curling from years of being handled. Outside, the rain tapped against the roof, steady and patient, like a hand reminding me that time was moving on. I realized then that proving my rights was not enough. I had spent years believing that, if I just held on, Daniel would remember the boy who used to tug at my sleeve and beg for one more story before bed. But the boy was gone. What remained was a man who allowed his wife to lock his mother out of her own home. The next morning, I took the bus downtown. The city buildings loomed grey and damp, their windows streaked with rain. I carried my documents in a cloth bag, pressed against my chest. When I entered the notary's office, the receptionist looked up with polite surprise, as if elderly women seldom arrived alone, carrying folders of legal proof. I sat at the desk, across from a young man in a crisp suit. His voice was calm, his pen clicking softly. "How can I help you today?" "Ma'am?" I placed the deed in front of him, then slid over a piece of paper where I had written my decision in careful handwriting. "I want to rewrite my will. The house on Alder Street. Every brick of it, I want to leave it to the Portland Senior Support Fund. They run shelters, provide meals, and care for elders who have nowhere to go." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Are you certain?" I met his gaze with steady eyes. More certain than I have ever been. As he typed, I thought about the years I scrubbed that kitchen floor. The summers, I watered roses until my back ached. To the winters, I patched the roof while Daniel was still in school. Every moment of work, every dollar saved, every thread of my life was stitched into that house. And yet, what is a house if its doors are locked against you? I signed my name with a hand that no longer trembled. The notary stamped the papers with a heavy sound that seemed to echo inside me, sealing not just ink on paper, but a decision I had waited too long to make. When I left, the rain had stopped. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, glinting off puddles like shards of silver. I walked slower than I used to, but lighter. The house would no longer be a prize to fight over. It would become shelter for those who understood what it meant to be left behind. For the first time in years, I felt not discarded, but free. I had just finished watering the small garden outside the senior center when I saw them. Daniel and Claire stood by the gate, dressed as if they had stepped out of a glossy magazine. Daniel's tie was loose, his face pale. Claire's lipstick was sharp, her heels clicking like accusations against the pavement. "Imma sick," Daniel called, his voice heavier than I remembered. "We need to talk." I set the watering can down and wiped my hands on my skirt. "Talk here." "I am busy." Claire pushed forward, eyes blazing. "We know what you did. You rewrote the will, gave the house to strangers. Do you understand how insane that looks? People will say you are being manipulated." I met her stare calmly. "The papers are notarized, witnessed, and filed. Nothing insane about clarity." Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Ma, please. You raised me there. That house is our family legacy." I shook my head slowly. Legacy is not measured in walls, Daniel. Legacy is how you treat the ones who built those walls for you. Claire scoffed, folding her arms. "Do you really think some charity deserves more than your own blood?" I leaned on my cane, straightening my back. "Blood is not enough when it runs cold. You changed the locks. You shut me out. So I gave the key to someone who will open the door." A small group of volunteers had gathered by then. their eyes darting between us. One young woman whispered, "Isn't that her son?" I heard their shame tighten like a rope. Claire's mask cracked. Her lips curled. But her voice trembled. "You will regret this. One day you will need us." I smiled. Not cruelly, but with a weight that made the air heavy. "I needed you when I came home from the hospital. I needed you when I knocked at the door. That day, you were not there. I will not need you again." Daniel's shoulders sagged. For a fleeting second, guilt flickered in his eyes. The boy I once carried, surfacing before sinking again. He turned away, muttering something I could not hear. Claire grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the street, her heels striking like hammer blows against stone. When the gate closed behind them, silence settled. The volunteers looked at me, with a mixture of respect and sorrow. I picked up the watering can once more. The roses bent gently under the spray, their petals trembling with life. They thought I had been defeated, a woman too frail to matter. But the truth stood stronger than their ambition. They had their locks, their threats, their empty words. And I had my freedom. For the first time in years, the door to my life was wide open. I once believed that silence was a form of peace. I thought if I kept my head low, if I swallowed hurt quietly, my children would see my patience as love. But I understand now that my silence was taken for weakness. It allowed them to believe I had no voice, no power, no claim to what I had built with my own hands. When I returned from the hospital and saw the new locks, I realized those locks did not stand for safety. They stood for rejection. They told me I was no longer welcome in the very home where I had poured my life's work. Yet what they forgot is that a lock only works if you give up the key. And my key was never made of metal. It was my will, my memory, my documents, and above all, my dignity. I gave that house away. Not to those who betrayed me, but to those who would understand its worth, to a community that will open its doors instead of shutting them. My son and his wife may inherit bitterness, but I will leave behind something greater, proof that age does not erase wisdom or rights. Papers can protect you, but papers alone are not enough. The truest protection is the belief that you matter, no matter how others try to erase you. So I say this to you, do not let silence make you invisible. Protect your dignity before anyone tries to lock it away.